Whether you are feeling burnt out, overwhelmed, or that something isn't quite the way that you know it can be, you are not alone. I hear the same from leaders every day. On Uncommon Leadership, we explore aligning personal fulfillment with business success, creating authentic teams, and cultivating the resilience necessary to move beyond simply surviving today's challenges into thriving. I'm Michael Hunter with Uncommon Teams, and today we'll uncover fresh insights on what it means to lead with resilience. Joining me today is Ryan Rigterink. Ryan is an expert at helping business leaders build amazing workplaces. He is the founder of WorkGaze, which offers insights to hire for engagement and retention and helps job seekers build personally meaningful careers. Ryan believes the future of work is creating more value for both people and the business, and his mission is to help make that happen. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
I am looking forward to our conversation today. And let's kick that off with, when did you first recognize that integrating your whole self, bringing that into everything that you do, might be a valuable approach?
Yeah, so about 15 years or so ago, I had a perfect storm in my life that basically was a kind of a reset across every part of my life. And so that was as challenging as it sounds, and it really caused me to start questioning, who am I? What am I here for? Like pretty much every question you can imagine came up and was pretty intimidating. And so, what's interesting about bringing our whole selves in is, for me to bring my whole self in, it's gonna probably maybe sound a little weird, but I actually had to leave parts of myself behind, like the things that were not serving me or my future or showing up in the way that I wanted to, just in terms of personal leadership and what I wanted my life to look like. For my best self and my whole self, as well as in the term of being like holistic, meant I first needed to leave some things behind, and that was somewhat counterintuitive, but probably makes sense looking back, and maybe should have been obvious, but it wasn't at the time. So
It never is. Those parts of you that you left behind, were those you, or were any of them parts that other people had offered or forced or suggested onto you that because it's happened so long ago you didn't realize it wasn't actually you, and it's just they've always been there, and so they thought that they were part of you?
yeah, that's actually a much deeper question than what it sounds like. As quickly as you said it, there's probably hours to unpack in that question alone. But I would say that self is not a static, concrete thing, right? It's dynamic. It's partly the story we tell ourselves, partly our agreements in terms of what you're talking about, as well as the things that are put on us, the environments and the contexts we're in, whether or not that aligns and accelerates or stifles and holds us back. And so, yeah, self realizing who I was and how that maybe the interaction of those things, and understanding that I own the relationship in that became really critical for my own journey in terms of that, because I had to accept greater responsibility for my relationship with my context, the environment that I put myself, how I talk to myself, the stories that in the whole sense-making process of that I either served my best and my future or actually undermined that. And so I think, there's a lot of different aspects of that, but it's ultimately, I think if you boil it down to it, it comes down to both managing my agreements across those things and managing my relationship with those things, whether that's people or an environment or a context or even an industry. So,
and with yourself as well.
yes, 100%. Starting there, I would say.
Yeah. How did you, as you went through that process of deciding what to keep and what to leave behind, how did you know which to do with which?
Could you maybe restate that? I would love a little more context in what you're asking.
Yeah. So I heard you say that as you went through this transformation, there were parts of you that you left behind so that the rest of you could move forward. How did you identify which parts to keep with you as you move forward and which parts of you to let go of and leave behind?
Yeah, so there's a really good standard that I think that I use as a guideline for that. It goes, whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is worthy, think about such things. And so I think for me, that's a good barometer of a lens of evaluation on those things. Ultimately, if it doesn't meet that criteria, then perhaps it doesn't inspire the level of hope or goodness that is possible. So
I like those words. Those are positive, uplifting descriptions that I'm sure helped you through the transformation just on their own, that you knew you were focusing on those aspects versus focusing on the reverse of those to figure out which things to leave behind. You're focusing on the parts that would help you move forward. And so the parts of you that aligned with that carried along, and the parts of you that didn't kind of disappeared on their own to some extent.
Yeah, some certainly faded away on their own. I think quite a few of them took deliberate act of like forgiveness, and whether that's of other people or circumstances or expectations of myself, or disappointment in this world can kind of wreak havoc on us if we don't manage ourselves properly through that. And so for me, that was, I'm very type A, task oriented, love to get results. And so, I had a journey that didn't get the kind of results that I wanted. In fact, one of the conclusions that I had in that process that I needed to proactively move past and leave behind was there was a massive amount of work and effort and finances and time that went into a project that had a fantastic mission. I still, I could spend years of my life doing that mission now and feel good about it, right? So there's nothing wrong with those investments of myself and resources, but at the end of it, I had nothing but a negative of ashes to show for it. So some of my own expectations that I needed to move past in a real world sense is I'd have been better off had for a period of years that I had sat like laid in a hammock. This is what kind of haunted me, right? It'd have been better if I'd have laid in a hammock for a few years than had I done and expended and done all of the massive body of work that I had done in that process. And so it cost me, it cost my family. But is that a true statement? Is that a true conclusion? Like maybe on its face, but so much these things that we have to put in a greater context of, well, okay, almost like interrogating our own thoughts and our own agreements in that sense of, well, is that really true? I mean, I had people tell me I got the equivalent of a master's or PhD in entrepreneurship and business through that process, even though, the results today weren't what they wanted. Ultimately, would that serve a greater purpose later? And it has, right? So this is just kind of where the messy middle where things haven't turned out the way we want, and sometimes in that middle we have the inverse of what we're pursuing. There's sometimes you have to dig a deep foundation before you build something that has potential to go high. So, but the real human journey through that is, I can attest, at least in my case, is kind of chews you up and spits you out from time to time. So
it can be pretty challenging at times, for sure. And it sounds like it was one of these, wouldn't wish it on anyone else and would never give it up for myself experiences.
I think there were, if I'm being honest, there were plenty of days I would have given it up for myself.
At the time, you would
but
have.
Absolutely true that I wouldn't
yourself?
wish it on my worst nightmare or on my worst enemy, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Looking back, are
Yeah,
there still
but-
some of those that you wish you had not experienced?
No, I mean, I think when we steward our experiences and we steward ourselves well, like all losses can be redeemed, right? There is a redemptive value that when you put those things in the right hands and steward ourselves the right way in that, that we come out better for it on the other end, even though, you know, the middle might be messy, right? So I've got a level of self-leadership and lessons learned in terms of being able to understand the high-level paradigms of industries and people and insights now that I have that I never would have, never would have probably refined or had that skill set sort of distilled into me through that process, right? So it was very much a learning experience. I call it my expensive tuition.
I like that, yeah. How do you take all this experience and build cultures where the people that you're working with, the companies that you're helping, feel safe and empowered to bring their unique talents into everything that they do?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to that. It's another very big question, but I think it starts with love, right? I think there's so often we try and do things in organizations that there's an outward appearance of, but it's not necessarily always backed by action. And so I think if you any time you can start with a genuine love and goodness towards other people, that's really, in a lot of ways, a necessary starting point. And so from that, I actually piloted a form of leadership called purpose management, which I guest lectured at a couple different business colleges about, talking about, in a nutshell, it's like, how do we show up to not just serve our own interests, but the others' interests at a higher level? And how can that value exchange actually be higher in both directions when that occurs? And so when we have people showing up that are not just in it for themselves, but are both serving and being served at a higher level with good intentions for someone's future and the results both today and tomorrow, that just gives us a lens that you can sense it. You can, I think, we've both been in conversations with thousands of people over the years, and you can sense when somebody's got genuine goodwill and wants to see you succeed versus if they're just in it for themselves and what they get out of it. And so moving from, I think, a people love and goodness forward and really taking action, not just giving words, but actually building the systems and the actions and the reinforcement of those words, that's powerful when that is done consistently over time. And so, we talk about psychological safety. It's sort of becoming talked about, which is great. But like what I say often with leaders is, we could talk about psychological safety. We can even measure it, but can you build it? And that there seems to be a gap yet in practice that we're talking about here. It's how do we practically change the dynamics of an organization so that it genuinely dignifies people in the future that they want to have, and not just what they can do to serve the bottom line of the organization. So that's sort of some starting points, if you will. I think a lot can be done along those lines, and certainly we are. But I think you get a long way there when you can show up with not only the right mindset but the right heart.
Heart, especially, is often not valued and sometimes explicitly devalued in business. How do you show the business value of creating cultures that focus on heart and people's unique talents and centering on that versus having this center be dollars or customers or whatever the primary metric that business uses?
Yeah, so in a case study, we actually quantified it with dollars, and so there is an ROI. I actually love this piece of it. There's an ROI to strategic goodness. Like it when we show up and we take care of all stakeholders at a higher level. It's kind of, some would call it the rule of the universe. I would call it kind of the fruit of the golden rule, right? When we give in a way that's meaningful, like that comes back to us. And we quantified that in a call center where people showed up not just to do tasks, but were invested in their own futures. And we quantified that. It's, as you can imagine, a call center is really high attrition rates. Industry average is 7 or 8 months for call center reps. And I came alongside their leadership, and that when we measured it for them, it was moved from 8 months to 24 months. And early 30-day turnover dropped 90%. And so when you quantify that across the silos of businesses, I mean, that's a very significant financial ROI to what can be seen as maybe soft skills or light fluff or like whatever. You can approach it in just strict dollars and cents, and yet people don't experience the same thing. And so I love the fact that employee experience is being elevated, that strategic goodness is starting to be talked about, and the fact that being less transactional and more relational in the employer-employee relationship is especially what the younger generations coming up, like, they don't want just a paycheck. And I love that about the younger generations, that what my generation sort of just figured we had to put our head down and deal with, whether you liked it or not, kind of thing. It was the price of doing business. It's a different world today, and there's different standards and expectations. And I love the fact that I know I'm going off of sort of in a tangent here, but I love the fact that the younger generation their concept around work is more work to live versus living to work. It's one of the things I think they've got right. So.
Absolutely. Have you run across any situations where this people focus didn't bring ROI, or maybe even it went the other direction?
So I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are instances. I have not seen it. It also very much depends on how you quantify the answer to that. So if you've got companies right now that when they have turnover and people leave the company, they view that sort of the old school mentality of, they view that as not being loyal, as though if they needed to lay off the employee, that would somehow be considered different. But so some of these things are like they're only one direction in terms of the frame of thought on it. But companies who treat their people on the way out really, really well, even though immediately the cost might appear to be a loss of talent or a loss of whatever, like how you view that is completely different. If you view that as somebody that you've invested into and now is actually a strategic mouthpiece and an ambassador for your company and how you treat your employees, and potentially even now a third-party referral for customers and employees. Like it depends very much on your mindset, even in how you measure that. And so what might appear today as a net loss, if you have a long time horizon on this and you value the reputation that's built and the long-term sort of fruit around some of this stuff, the payoffs and the dividends on that aren't just for this quarter. It's if done right, it yields a dividend, whether that's reputational or whatever, or actual referrals for a long time. And so, I think sometimes we need to recalibrate our standard of measurement on some of these things, because it determines sort of the result. How we measure determines what we quantify and the results of our perception around those results. So,
as you're working with a company and you notice that a recalibration might be useful, how do you bring that up and help them evaluate the ROI of doing that?
So every company has a different starting point. It's very situational. So there's not a cookie cutter approach to that. It very much depends on what the mindsets of the leadership are, the current, everything from the current level of turnover, the current employee relationships. I mean, it's very situational, even across team to team within a company. So I think what's critical though is to get senior leadership buy-in, and then create sort of an internal pilot, if you will, that then doesn't force people into a change, which typically can backfire and not go so well, right? The ROI on that tends to be really low, because ultimately most change initiatives have to be a mindset shift. And so if you can start small and build the internal case of the results that are coming from it, even though it's a different mindset, then people want to elect in the same way that people are willing to do more work right now when it's in their best interest. Like take the example of ATMs, right? You go back 20 years ago, we didn't count our own money. We didn't envelope it and do all this sort of stuff. We walked in and a teller did that every time for us. Well, now we're actually much more willing to do the work that leaves less work for the bank to do, because it's more convenient for us. And so we still have choice, and we still can choose what's in our own preference and well-being. But if we apply that to the workplace, I think introduce choice, introduce the benefits, and people will self-elect into change when they're ready for it. And that tends to be how we can start small and then have it permeate through an organization, and without it being a top-down sort of forced change initiative, which again doesn't usually go well. So
No, it doesn't. And that's a perfect segue to my next question. How do you help the people that you're working with, the teams that you're working with, find their way through all the change, uncertainty, and overwhelm that seems to be life these days?
Yeah, so the pace of change is, it seems like it's only increasing. And so I think that's very much a challenge. I think there's a certain amount of it that we need to adjust based on the person. People have different levels of sort of change tolerance. And so, whenever possible, manage that change at a pace that you can bring as many people along as possible, knowing full well that there's also a pace of reality that if we're going to stay competitive, if we're going to actually, we can't always bring everybody along in that. And so that's a judgment call in the moment. But I think changing, it kind of ties back to your earlier question about self and how we speak about ourselves. And there's a thing called psychological anchoring. Our value that we create for a company in a lot of these arenas is going to be changing as the landscape changes, as AI is being introduced, as all of these constant sort of changes are happening. And so some of that is a mindset shift of the connected to the who am I, of how do I create value for the company, and even in the form of leadership, how do I create value in how I lead people. The traditional command and control versus, leading out of inspiring and creating trust and really leading environments, creating environments that empower and support the initiatives of the people with sort of a distributed leadership mindset. Those are very, like, my role in each of those would be significantly different, but the fact is, I don't change. How I show up changes, how I create value changes, and ultimately how I relate to the thing or the person or the organization, that relationship might need to change. And so recognizing that personal value, like you as a human being, like that value can't be touched. But what can be done is how all these other changes that we can adapt. And so giving people permission to have the time they need, but then also, I think, calling out the aspects of it in a way that don't threaten the individual, but understand that there's an adaptation in role and relationship and how value is created over time that can become sort of a roadmap where people can all of a sudden maybe not be able to make the leap mentally, can sort of give something them to grab a hold of on the other side of what feels like a chasm at times. So,
and can help them decide, as you mentioned earlier, whether this change is for them or not.
That's right.
Not every change is for every person, and that's okay.
Definitely.
Not everyone needs to come along. If we really care about the person, then helping them find a new position that remains a fit for them, whether that's in the company or external, is the best thing to do for everyone involved.
Absolutely. Yep. I have my wife and I, we have 4 kids, and they are all vastly different. Like, you couldn't probably find 4 more unique and different. And I so often when it comes to leadership, I draw on what does a good father and a good mother think and act in these situations, and exactly what you just said. For me to take one of my sons who's super gifted in music, and then a daughter who is super gifted in analytics and strategy. If I told her she needed to do music and I told my son he needed to do analytics and strategy, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, it sounds even perhaps foolish to bring that up, but that's oftentimes what we do with when it comes to employees. We try and sort of cram a square peg in a round hole kind of thing, instead of actually looking at each person in who they are and find out how they can show up in a mutually beneficial way through choice. And if that's another role in the company, if that's a role outside of the company, or if that's them, changing with the new role, all of those are options. So ultimately, though, kind of going back to an earlier point, if we care about people to begin with, those things become obvious. Like just the next step of how someone would act. But if you don't have that heart to start with, those become have to become intentional steps. So
yes. And you have a few tools for our audience to help them do this, right?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely.
Illuminate us, please.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were asking it or not. Sure, yeah. So I developed a coaching program for leaders to really do this paradigm shift, to move out of command and control or enlightened command and control into more of a purpose management or inspire and trust and build that sort of higher value creation in the employer-employee relationship. And out of that came some of these tools. So currently developing a platform called Workgaze that takes some of these mutual value creation insights and adds them into the recruiting and hiring process. Specifically, so if we look at how hiring has been done for hundreds of years, the resume has been around for 500 plus years. And it basically looks at, okay, what have you done to date? And is pretty much from like a qualifications and a keyword parsing sort of approach. And so what we recognize in this process, that to really create value, higher value between employers and employees, like we can't just recruit based on the past and manage the present, but ultimately what's in a mutual best interest is how can we build a really high value shared future? And so what we're doing is we're adding in what are the insights that both the employer and the job seeker can add in terms of that future, shared future, and adding that strategically into the hiring process. And so it's kind of a little bit of a blue ocean where we're creating some things that are new and haven't been used. We've done it in sort of spreadsheet analog fashion, but now we're creating the digital tools and the machine learning and the algorithms and everything to actually power that in a much more user-friendly way. So I'm very excited to launch that. We're working right now on the job seeker side, and once we finish standing that up, we'll be also following right up with the employer side of that. So
Nice. That's super exciting. I can't wait till everyone is using tools like this. That'll be a great work.
yeah, I'm really excited about it, and it's it's exciting because it's my own business, but that's actually not why it's most exciting. It's most exciting because my wife and I, we have 4 kids who are young professionals, are in college or just out of college, and I've worked with hundreds of other youth, and ultimately what I see is a world where we ask really difficult questions of this particular age group, like what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do? Like, and there's not, some do, but I'd say the majority don't have enough experiences and personal data to even really assess that. And so what we're doing is making something that's dynamic. It puts the control in the hands of the individual in terms of self-guided, self-directed career navigation, but adds that insight into helping really people find not only an organization, but a career that they thrive in and they can build towards. And without necessarily needing to have a PhD in being a career coach, can also come alongside them as a manager or someone in an organization and have those insights for that to be mutually beneficial in the workplace as well. So yeah, my goal is that there's no more meaningless work, and that we can genuinely help people thrive, both at work, because the spillover effect to homes and families and society, I think, imagine everywhere you go, people thoroughly invested in what they're doing, it bringing joy, and it's serving their interest of the future that they want to have. Like every place we go would be better for that. And so if we can create a world that has even a dent of 10 or 20% impact on that, hopefully a lot more, but if we can even impact that in measure, I think the benefit to society is vast. So I'm very excited about it.
Absolutely. I say it this way, that we should all, I want to be in a world where everyone is focused on doing the work that they love and divesting everything else to someone else. So whatever you don't want to do, there's someone who would love to do that for you. So don't do it yourself. Right. You're making them unhappy by not letting them do it for you. And you're making you unhappy by making you do it.
Yes. Yep. And the things that are challenging and maybe we don't enjoy as much, sometimes those are underlying skills we need to learn. But if there's ultimately serving a future that we are invested in, then that seems a little less awful and a little more joyful even in that process. So
Yes, I was talking with a client about this just yesterday, actually. And my suggestion to him was, if you feel something you might call a weakness is holding you back, then, and you feel it's something that you really want to be able to do yourself and that handing off to someone else isn't the right thing to do, then yeah, get good enough at it that it's not holding you back. You don't need to become a superstar at it. It's the amount of work it's going to take to become a superstar is something that's not a strength. And the amount of value and change you'll get out of that is way less generally than if you applied even a tenth of that amount of work into strengthening with the strengths that you already have.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, the whole work on your weaknesses versus leverage your strengths is that's, I think the pendulum has swinged in the right direction on that. Leverage our strengths. So
Ryan, if people would like to talk with you, learn more about WorkGaze, what it might be like to have you work with them, what's the best way for them to find you, learn more?
So they can go to workgaze.com and they can contact me through there, or if they prefer email, they can email me at ryan@workgaze.com. So be happy to.
That's super simple. And I'll have all those links in the show notes. What would you like to leave our audience with today?
Oh, there's reason to hope for a better future. Regardless of what you're going through today, there is a tomorrow. It's better than today. And, there's reason to invest in your tomorrow. The thing that going back to the story of when, what you asked earlier about my really difficult, perfect storm season, like there were times I wanted to give up. There were times that, I've said before, I wasn't suicidal, but I didn't necessarily want to live either. Right. And so if you're in that place today, especially with the amount of change and uncertainty and everything else, like I just want, if you can hear anything from today, just hear that you're good. Your value cannot be questioned, whether you are job searching right now, have been out of a job for a while, or in a very secure job. Like that's not your value, and there's reason to hope both today and for the future. So
that's beautiful, Ryan. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, audience, for joining us as well. If you aren't sure of your value, contact Ryan and me. We'll help you understand what it is. And if you are sure of your value and you aren't sure how to talk about that with your boss or your spouse or anyone else, contact us as well. We'd love to help you with that. Thanks.
Indeed. Well, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed the conversation.
This was great. Thank you so much, Ryan. Have a great day.